Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our webinar on disc behavioural profiling this afternoon. We have enabled your cameras. So if you want to have your camera on, then by all means you can do. But also if you are eating your lunch and you don't want us to see that, then that's also fine. We have muted you, so please use the chat function throughout if there is anything. So, who are we? For those that don't recognise our smiley faces on the screen there, my name's Lizzie Walsh. I'm the HR business partner at Hallidays HR, and Liz Chiver is our HR director, co-delivering with me this afternoon. So, for those that don't know, Hallidays HR is a training, HR and recruitment consultancy practice. We're based in Stockport, but today the focus is concentrating on disc behavioural profiling. We are recording the webinar, so by the end of this week you will have a copy of the recording along with a copy of the slides. Okay, so let's get started then in terms of what we're going to be covering over the next 45 minutes or so. We're going to look at, what actually is DISC, what is behavioural profiling, why we think that you should be using it, how you can apply it. We'll also take a deeper look actually at what DISC is, and then we'll finish off with some success stories. So, in terms of what behaviour profiling is then, so it's the process of assessing and understanding an individual's behaviour. It's about their personality traits, it's about their communication style and kind of how they prefer to communicate or be communicated with, and it allows people to be able to understand a little bit more about what makes them tick, what they're naturally good at, perhaps if there's something that they're not so good at, what that might be and why. It looks at what motivates people, so what gets them out of bed in the morning, what they're scared of, so if there are any barriers or any challenges, what they might be and why, and as I mentioned, their preferred communication style. So once you've got a behavioural profiling, I guess it gives you that deeper understanding of a person so that they can understand, or you can understand about them, perhaps why it is that they did something a certain way, or why it is that they behaved in a certain way, and even potentially kind of looking forward into the future to kind of think about how might that person behave, or how might they react in that certain scenario that crops up. Excuse me. So, in terms of why we think you should use behavioural profiling, there's quite a lot of synergy in terms of the benefits. So we're going to look at it from an individual perspective, from a manager perspective, but then also from the whole company. But there's quite a bit of crossover, which is why we like it, because there's no point using a tool if it is just going to benefit one person. It's got to be kind of, benefiting a number of people. So let's look at it from an individual perspective. So the key thing, I guess, with disc behavioural profiling, when you are looking at it from an individual, is it's all about self-awareness. And self-awareness is about that ability to understand your own emotions, thoughts, behaviours, and ultimately how they affect you on a personal level, but also those around you, and it's about being mindful of how our behaviours and emotions can impact on other people. So as I mentioned, it's about those things in terms of what makes you tick, what you might be good at, not so good at, and what motivates you or what scares you. But you can kind of delve into those sorts of things a lot more. But understanding all of those things then in turn reaps a number of benefits there, of which are on the screen. So first up, we've got that enhances emotional intelligence. So people with self-awareness, they can manage their emotions that little bit better than without it. They can perhaps be a little bit more empathetic to a situation or towards a person. and they can effectively communicate better. So they become that effective communicator because they've got that self-awareness and understanding. And from an individual point of view, when they can recognize their emotional triggers, so things that might kind of trigger them or patterns of certain behavior, it allows them to be able to kind of respond that little bit better. And kind of, rather than being a little bit reactive and kind of maybe a little bit impulsive, it's a bit more kind of thought-provoked agenda that they kind of go down. Another benefit to the individual is about improving decision making. So as an individual, when we understand our strengths, our development areas, what our values are, what our morals are, whether we've got a strong moral compass or not, it really helps us to be able to make those informed and objective decisions. We've then got a benefit of strengthening relationships. So once you are aware of your behaviour, like I said at the beginning, when you are aware of your own behaviour and how it impacts on other people, you can then kind of be a little bit more empathetic or communicate better with that person, because you've got that self-awareness. So you might be able to adapt your behaviour when you are kind of within that, whether it's a working relationship or a personal relationship. And self-aware individuals are more likely to be able to listen actively. Apologies. They can adapt their behaviour, and they can resolve conflict, but they can do it in a constructive way. We've also got drives personal growth. So having that awareness enables an individual to be able to identify areas for improvement, but also to be able to take the steps toward whatever that personal development might be. So it means that they can set, realistic goals. They can understand if there are any barriers or challenges to growth, what they are, if there's anything holding them back, potentially what those are, and what they can do to kind of, remove those. DISC also boosts confidence and resilience, because once you understand what your strengths and your achievements are, then you can gain confidence in your abilities. But likewise, if perhaps dealing with feedback or criticism isn't a strength of an individual, using DISC will better equip them to actually think, well, okay, this isn't criticism, this is constructive criticism. So it kind of takes away that negative slant on it, and they're able to kind of see it more from, a positive spin on it, and use it to their benefit to ultimately grow. And then finally, we've got reduces stress and promotes mental well-being. So self-awareness can help an individual identify what those stresses are. So whether it's something in work or whether it's something outside of work, ultimately, what is it that's, creating that negative thought pattern that they're perhaps having? And, in all of this, having the awareness can be half the battle. But once they have got that awareness, they can then put strategies in place. So that might be that they go on to to practice mindfulness, or they're able to actually kind of self-reflect and actually think, do you know what? I could have done better, or I perhaps shouldn't have said it that way. I could have handled things a little bit different. So it just gives that kind of overall picture, which ultimately can kind of overall improve their mental health. Next up then, we've got it from a manager point of view. So using DISC from a manager's point of view is very much about aiding that effective people management. So the benefits, as on the screen, are about that improved communication. So DISC helps managers to be able to adapt their communication style and ultimately get the best out of their employees. It means that their communication style will be clear, it'll be, as transparent as possible. And ultimately, it means that the misunderstandings or, those Chinese whispers and those mixed messages are going to reduce. It can lead to better team collaboration. So managers are able to use DISC to identify the strengths and development areas of their employees and ultimately align tasks. So if you've got an employee that is stronger in a particular area than someone else, then, you know, it goes without saying that it would make sense to give that particular task to that person with the strength, because one, they're good at it. Chances are it's something that they enjoy doing, you know, and ultimately you're going to get a particular task done that little bit quicker and hopefully more effectively. So you can kind of tailor the tasks that your employees do based on knowing their DISC behavioural profile. Managers can use it for conflict management and resolution. So understanding DISC profiles really helps managers to be able to kind of mediate those conflicted situations. It allows them to kind of look at, you know, what the root cause of that conflict might potentially be and kind of try to find that common ground between specific parties. It also leads to personalised motivation. So as with, you know, DISC looking at what makes people motivated and what makes them tick, ultimately managers can use DISC to kind of tailor their motivational strategies to get the best out of their employees. So, you know, the whole carrot and the stick might work for one person, but potentially it doesn't work for somebody else. So it's just about being able to adapt and tailor the approach dependent on the individual. We've then got development plans. So DISC really helps managers in terms of being able to mentor and kind of coach and guide employees by being able to identify what those potential development areas are and putting plans in place accordingly. We've got the list is endless. We've then got recruitment and promotion. So DISC is a really useful tool for helping you find the right candidate. So yes, we know recruitment is all about, can somebody do the job? Have they got the technical expertise to be able to do the job? You know, do they meet all the requirements of the job description? You know, tick, tick, tick. However, this kind of looks more so about the fit of the person. So you can look at, you know, here's a gap in our team. We need somebody that is a really good communicator or deals with something particularly well. DISC would really be enable you to be able to drill down into that more in terms of whether or not they would fit the role, but also whether or not they would fit in with your team or whether there'd be any concerns there. Next up is higher productivity. So as I mentioned before about being able to kind of tailor your tasks to certain people, you are inevitably going to get that higher productivity if you can do such a thing, because ultimately you're not going to be wasting your effort and your time kind of asking somebody that doesn't have a particular strength in a certain area to do something. You know, it's potentially going to lead to misunderstandings. It's potentially going to lead to things perhaps not being done the way that you expected. So, you know, that's going to have an impact. Whereas actually, if you can align tasks accordingly to meet the strengths of your employees, that's going to lead to greater efficiency and indeed output. We've then got stronger team dynamics. So managers can very much use DISC to help kind of balance that team and the composition of the team. So it's about making sure, you know, it's a bit like baking a cake, I guess. It's about making sure that you've got all the right ingredients, you've got that good mix of DISC profiles. You know, you can kind of, you've got people that complement each other. So they're all aligned, they're all working to the same goal. There's that overall synergy, but as well, you know, different people with different profiles will have different ideas, you know, and be able to contribute to a team in a number of different ways, all of which will help enforce that stronger team dynamic. And then finally, but last but not least, definitely, is reduced turnover. So, you know, if you can understand your employees, if you can communicate effectively with them, if you know kind of what job satisfaction looks like to them, then, you know, managers can then reduce turnover rates. You know, you can potentially save time and resources on having to kind of, you know, recruit somebody, but then actually, oh, you know, you recruit them, you induct them, you train them, and then it doesn't quite work out. This can hopefully, you know, help to kind of relieve that for you. Okay, I'll just take a glass of water and drink of it. Okay, so, oops, sorry. So from finally then a company level, so it's all about having that positive workplace culture. So it's very much about, you know, enhancing that productivity and actually using and implementing DISC behavioural profiling in the workplace has been associated with kind of, you know, several measurable improvements in terms of the performance of a business. So when it comes to that enhanced productivity, what I mean by that is that employees who understand their profiles, they can leverage their strengths and address their areas for development, which is going to lead to that increased productivity. And as mentioned before, you know, businesses can very much benefit from having a balanced team by being able to recognize different personality types and therefore further boosting performance. This leads to improved engagement and retention. So better understanding of co-workers, that's going to enhance that communication. It's going to reduce the conflict, which will ultimately foster that positive workplace culture that you are looking for. That's going to lead to higher engagement from your employees and increased retention rates. And actually, a stat for you here, the engaged employees are 87% less likely to leave an organisation, and higher engagement is linked to 24% lower turnover and 21% higher profitability. So the figures do really speak for themselves in terms of the benefit that it can have. And then finally is leadership development. So using a DISC behavioural profile helps to identify, you know, the strengths and the areas for improvement within your leadership team, you know, and development plans and, you know, growth plans and whatnot can be tailored dependent on obviously, you know, what the report shows you. But ultimately it's going to result in, you know, more effective leaders who can kind of help drive the team forward, individual success, team success, but then overall company success, you know, and that growth of the company, which is, you know, what you're looking for. Okay, so in terms of uses then of behavioural profiling, it can be used within a number of different ways within a business. So you can use it in recruitment. As I said, you know, it's very much about finding the right candidate in terms of that fit. You can use it in team building. So actually, if you've got a team that knows each other's profiles, you know, you can share that. You can kind of look at you know, if there are any clashes between people, so that relationship development that's mentioned on there. You know, if you've got people that perhaps aren't getting on, DISC is a really good way to be able to look at kind of why that might be and what can be kind of done to mitigate that. You can use it for development and personal growth. But then you can also use it if you need to performance manage somebody, or if you've got to mediate, or in conflict resolution as well. You can use it as a tool for that. And then finally, you can use it as part of restructuring. So it is a really powerful and versatile tool. And at the end of the session, Liz is actually going to talk through a couple of case studies to kind of back up what I'm saying. I'm not just making it up. But why choose DISC, I hear you say, or I would if I hadn't muted you. I can sense that that's what you're thinking. You know, you've probably heard of Myers-Briggs, you might have heard of IMA or even Insights. There are, you know, many behavioural tools out there, but our personal favourite is DISC, mainly because it's proven to be around 89% accurate. And it does actually only take 5 to 10 minutes maximum for the individual to complete. So I am now going to pass over to Liz, who's going to talk through DISC in a little bit more detail.
everyone. So just, I guess, before we look at the modern kind of behavioural profiling that Lizzie and I are very familiar with, I just want to cover kind of a bit of the history and the core idea behind DISC actually goes all the way back as far as ancient Greece. And they first considered human behaviour in terms of kind of 4 different factors. So they were very much looking at kind of wind, earth, fire, and air. And the modern kind of DISC theory appeared in the 1920s, and that was kind of developed by a psychologist called William Marsden. And this was like one of the first attempts really to apply psychology to ordinary people kind of outside of that clinical setting. So it was kind of looking at how people behave and how they interact, like I say, you know, in the day-to-day kind of lives, really. And he was the one who developed the 24 kind of questions. It's a questionnaire that would basically allow him to quickly appraise kind of the different types of behavior out there and the different types of personality. And it's kind of grown from there, really. So, I mean, it still is a questionnaire which is, you know, 24 questions long. Like Lizzie says, it's literally kind of takes 5 to 10 minutes to complete. And it's one of the most widely used profiling tools in the UK, but in the world as well. So, you know, it is a fantastic tool. They've said that, you know, none of these tools are 100% accurate. So I think they say that this one is about 89% accurate. So, you know, we recognize that that isn't 100%. And, you know, with any time we ever go through any of these processes and that we do these profiles and these reports, we make sure that we are having conversations with people around them to make sure that, you know, they fully understand what their profile means and what it says about them. But obviously it gives them an opportunity to say, do you know what, actually, that doesn't sound quite like me. But, you know, in the majority of cases that we deal with, most people say, oh my God, I can't actually believe how spot on that is. It's scary. So, you know, it is actually a brilliant tool. Okay, and just in terms of, I guess, tell you a bit, I guess, about what the report looks like and what the graphs look like that it produces and how we interpret those. So basically, from the 24 questions that you would complete on an online questionnaire, an online survey, it basically gives you a score on each of those characteristics on a scale of kind of 1 to 100. So it doesn't matter like where you sit on that scale. It's not the case that the closer to 100 you get, the better that characteristic is. It really just tells us where you, depending on where you sit within that characteristic, just tells us something different about your behavioral traits and your personality profile. Okay, it's probably important to kind of say that there's no right or wrong profile with any of this. So, you know, each individual is themselves. We appreciate that everybody is different, and you know, there's no, like I say, right or wrong profile in that respect. Just to explain, I guess, the graphs. So from within the report, it basically produces 4 different graphs. So if we just look at that first one then, so that's the internal graph. So this is what we call your true self. So this one basically looks at how you behave naturally and intrinsically when there's no pressure on whatsoever. So this is kind of outside of work, and generally this one remains static over time. So it's not something that, you know, unless you kind of experience like a, you know, quite a traumatic experience, either like, I don't know, a messy divorce or like a death of a close family member or something, generally this graph stays the same. And we're, you know, because intrinsically, I guess we are who we are, and it's that whole kind of genetic thing. The external graph, however, is what we call your work mask. So this is actually a snapshot in time of when you were completing the questionnaire, of how you were behaving in the work situation at the time of completing the questionnaire. So obviously, if you were to complete it again tomorrow or next week or next year, then it may give a very different result depending on what's going on at work at that time. Then that third graph there, that summary graph. So that one there basically is the average of your internal and your external graph, and kind of gives that kind of summary, an overview, I guess, of what someone's general behavior might look like. And then that final graph, so this one is, it looks at the shifts. So this looks at how, whether you're adapting your behavior from your internal graph in your work. And if so, how much are you having to adapt each of those characteristics? And the reason why we look at that is because if someone is kind of having to put that work hat on and having to adapt quite considerably on a regular basis, then it will feel quite uncomfortable for that prolonged period of time. And actually, if you are under a pressure situation or a really tight deadline or whatever, then it's proven that you'll kind of revert back to your natural self, and you will, as displayed in your internal graph. So it's about understanding when those might present themselves and whether potentially it might be an issue. And just, I guess, so from this this kind of profile here, what we would generally do is look at kind of what your most dominant characteristic is. So you can see and we take this from the internal profile. So you can see for this one that this person has their highest dot, if you like, is the high S. So this is what we would call a green, or sometimes we call it animals with a dolphin. So yeah, so but obviously it can be any of those characteristics. Okay, so if I just kind of talk you through, I guess depending on obviously which one is your most dominant characteristic, obviously we would, if we were doing this on an individual level from a self-awareness point of view, we would talk through each one of those dots that are on all of those profiles. But I guess just to give you a flavor of kind of what somebody's most dominant characteristic says about them. So if they had kind of their highest characteristic was in the D, so that first little dot there, these people are basically, as you can see from the quadrant, they are outgoing people, but they're also task orientated. So these people are they're very short, sharp, to the point type people. They are, they're assertive, they're competitive, they're not afraid of making decisions, and they can, they're very kind of focused and tailored in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So they know what they want, they know how to get it, and they just crack on and do it. In terms of, I guess, their communication style, if you like I kind of said, they're short, sharp, to the point. So they don't want any waffle whatsoever. They just want you, if you've got something to say, just say it. And they're probably going to do that either face to face in person, or they're going to do it over the phone. Okay. Now, sometimes, obviously, if you're, these people could kind of come across as maybe a bit rude, maybe a bit aggressive in some circumstances if people aren't a lot on the same wavelength. But, all of this is about, nobody is doing any of this on purpose. And this kind of helps to mitigate that a little bit. Just moving on to the high I then. So these people are what we call the yellows. So, and these people, again, they're really outgoing, but they're very much the people. So, they're very chatty, they're very sociable, they like the limelight, they like understanding people, they like speaking to people face to face. They're the ones that are going to ask, how are you? How was your weekend? what did you get up to last night? Did you watch Love Island? What did you have for tea? All of those kind of stuff. Because they are genuinely interested in building those kind of personal connections. Generally, you find these people are brilliant in kind of sales, marketing, business development type roles, anything really where they've got to build those relationships quite quickly. They're absolutely fantastic at. Okay. And then if we look at the high S, so that's the dot that we had before. So these people are what we call the greens. So these people from an outgoing perspective are much more reserved, and they work at a kind of a slower pace, if you like, but they're still very much people orientated. So these people are like the nicest people you will ever meet. They are, they're really loyal, they're great team players, they're very empathetic, they're caring, they're sensitive. They're very much a kind of arm around each other, kind of supportive kind of people. Sometimes they can, they can be a little bit resistant to change. So because they're very routine orientated, so they like to have all their ducks in a row, like to be planned, they like to be organized. So, if anything comes up, or people want to change things at kind of that fast pace, sometimes they can be that no person, if you like, and a little bit reluctant to change, but only because perhaps they haven't been given that extra time to be able to process exactly what it means to come up with that plan B. And then finally then is the high C. So this is the blues. So these people are, again, more on the reserved side. These people are kind of more slow paced. They often are very thoughtful in their approach, but they're very task orientated as well. So again, they're very much about getting the job done. So they might be quite, head down, kind of get the work done. They're very much focused on kind of facts, figures, procedures, policies. They like research. They like making sure that whatever they do is 100% right. They like to be that expert in things. They're very much evidence-based people. So, if you want to change somebody's views, or you want to change a system or a process or whatever, you're going to need to not just tell them to do something better. You're going to have to show them how and why, that they need to do this better. In terms of communication style, they're much more on the kind of the written kind of communication. They like them, and obviously the details. So these people you might receive very comprehensive emails from, or reports and that type of thing, and they like that. Okay. And obviously, I guess, these are all, although people might have a blend of these things, their dominant characteristics are all very different places to sit. And, like we've kind of said, they're all great, they're all valid. What it's about is a lot of this is about that self-awareness piece that Lizzie was talking about. So that's almost like the first step that we ever really kind of go into, is about look internally first and understand yourself and what and who you are. But then you can start looking out the way and start actually thinking, right, what are the people that I work with? What might their dominant characteristics be? And then how might I be able to change my style in order to get the best out of them, and to kind of mirror whatever their behavioural preferences happen to be. And you can also kind of, I guess, just feeding onto that, is that you can also recognize these different styles in different areas as well. So I guess it's not just about the speaking and that type of thing, but it's about things like people's body language, the types of emails that they might write, what kind of presentations they might give, whether it's very wordy, whether it's picture orientated, that type of thing. And even down to like what their office environment looks like. So for example, like the greens, so they normally might have, like, if you go around the office, they'll be the ones that have lots of pictures of their family, and maybe some cuddly toys and some plants, and them trying to make it feel very homely, and their personality kind of coming out from that. Whereas on the flip side, there's people that have literally nothing on the desk. Work is work and we're just here to do a job type thing. You can tell a lot from that. Likewise, your high yellows in terms of presentations, they might be very picture orientated. They might be very interactive. They might ask a lot of questions, things about ideas, enthusiastic, that type of thing. And then like I said, in terms of emails, high reds, for example, they might just provide, literally, they might not even say hi or bye. They might just say things like done or yes. They don't need the niceties necessarily in order to kind of to do something. A lot of them do recognize that they might need to change that. And like I said, blues potentially as well, their email style might be more detailed, quite long. And yellows might go, they'll be very much, yellows and greens, in all fairness, will be saying, the whole hello, how are you, how was your weekend, all of those niceties, adding a bit of the fluff to the emails, and that's quite important for them. Okay. So just want to kind of finally touch on some success stories. So, we've worked with quite a lot of clients really over the years using DISC. And whenever we do that, they really benefit from it. And Lizzie's obviously said we can use it in all different kind of areas of the business, and we use it a lot in recruitment, which works absolutely fantastically to add that additional layer with it. But this particular success story, there's just two I want to kind of go a bit more in depth with. And this particular one was a client of ours who are a greetings card company. And they were basically growing massively. So, they had more team members. They had to obviously get more stuff out the door. And they had to kind of change the way that they had traditionally been working. So I think, there's two directors. They really kind of wanted to give that great leadership, and they wanted to be those motivating and engaging leaders, but they kind of lacked the knowledge and the experience to really kind of understand their team members to be able to get the best out of them. And they also find that, like, from a communication point of view, that there was, maybe mixed messages or people talking behind their backs, maybe a bit of conflict situations, having to say things a few times and that type of thing. So it was really kind of affecting the performance of the team as well. And also, they found that they were making some quite poor recruitment decisions, and they wanted, like I said before, to kind of add that extra layer and that added depth to their decision making. So basically what we did with them is that we profiled all of their team. So we did individual kind of self-awareness sessions. So basically every individual fills out a questionnaire, they get a report back, they have a feedback session. They had a feedback session with myself where we go, for an hour, where we really go into quite in depth and understanding from their personal point of view. Then what we did is we put together a team session for all of them. So it was like a half-day session going into, the ins and outs of DISC, but really kind of honing in on what everybody's individual profile was and what that looked like. And also, what their strengths and development areas potentially were like. What does it look like when they're under stress? What would they prefer their communication style to be? And have that really much greater in-depth kind of impact. And we found, as you can see from, the after part on the screen, is it had a massive kind of impact on them overall as a business, from, being able to improve their leadership skills, improve the communication, being able to highlight who those rising stars are from a development point of view, if you like, and then obviously from a recruitment point of view as well. So really successful there. And then just finally, we have used DISC within one of our clients called Temperature Control. So they're an air conditioning company, and they basically we worked with the managing director. He was kind of they were working harder, not smarter, basically. And we worked with them to kind of what he did was to look at each individual, again, going through the same process from a self-awareness point of view, but then we looked at it from what people's strengths were and assigning people's job roles in line with those particular strengths. Because when we looked at it, what we found is that people were in sales roles, for example, that had absolutely they weren't a yellow, they weren't a high I, they didn't like talking to people, they didn't like networking, they didn't like, doing that kind of interactive selling stuff. Yet they were being placed into those roles and they were feeling really uncomfortable and not being hugely successful around that. So what we did was like I say, we worked with him to make sure that we put the round pegs in the round holes, and we restructured the business on that basis, and it's now thriving and doing brilliantly well. So yeah, another success story there. Oh, sorry, just one other thing I forgot to mention is that what they've also done as a kind of an after not an afterthought, I don't think, but just to make sure that this is kind of always in people's minds, is that they put it up on a board in terms of what everybody's style is, so that on a day-to-day basis, they're constantly being reminded of, who the people are, what's their behavioural preferences, so that when people are interacting, they can always have this at the forefront of their mind, which, works really well for them. Okay. So I know that's kind of a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of behavioural profiling in general, and then obviously delving a little bit deeper into DISC. But if anybody is interested and wants to chat more about how we might be able to help you, either on an individual basis or from a team or recruitment or whatever, any of the areas that we've spoken about today, please do not hesitate to contact us. If anybody has any questions today, by all means, drop them on the chat as well. More than happy to answer anything, or that's absolutely fine. But if not, then we will bid you a good afternoon. Give you a few seconds for the questions.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Carol. Thanks for coming. Okay, no problem, Robin. Thank you. You're welcome, Liv. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Right, have a good day, everyone. We'll see you later. Bye-bye. Bye.